Hello, I'm Sean Servas from FEMA headquarters. Now we're going to go over Module 5, Attaching and Ranking Sub-Applications. In Module 4, we covered creating the grant application for either Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program or the Flood Mitigation Assistance grant program. Now we're going to talk about attaching and ranking sub-applications that will be attached to that grant application. Let's take a moment to review what we'll accomplish. At the end of this module, you'll be able to explain how to attach a sub-application to an application, recognize the different funding classification options, identify the reasons for ranking sub-applications, explain the methods used to rank building resilient infrastructures and communities and flood mitigation assistance sub-applications, and recognize the organization of the budget section of a grant application. To begin the process, after you go to the FEMA GO homepage, you'll click on Manage My Grants tab in the blue ribbon on the homepage, and you'll be presented with a list of your grant applications. In the previous module, we showed how you can search, sort, and filter those options to display the grants that you're trying to find. So when you find your grant that's either pending submission or if you're working on a new grant application, you can select Continue. And the first section of a grant application is the sub-application section. In the legacy system, attaching the sub-applications occurred at the end of the process for preparing the grant application, and that was problematic for a few reasons. And so having the sub-applications attached early on in the process of developing your grant application eliminates some of the pitfalls that we had in the legacy system. So you can click on the Add Sub-Applications button, and you'll be presented with a list of approved sub-applications. So after the review, the sub-application is approved, and once they're in an approved by recipient status, they'll be available to be attached to your grant application. You can see in this screenshot that there are two sub-applications available to be attached to the grant application. Building codes, South Dakota County number 42 project scoping. FEMA GO presents three funding categories in BRIC. Their allocation, competitive, and management costs. And in FMA, they are ranked, management costs, and technical assistance. The BRIC allocation funding category is for sub-applications that will be submitted towards the state allocation that is identified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The state allocation funds are available for states, territories, and the District of Columbia. Federally recognized Indian tribes applying directly to FEMA do not use the allocation funding category. The competitive funding category is for sub-applications that will be submitted for the national evaluation and federally recognized Indian tribes applying directly to FEMA. The tribal set-aside will be recognized in the competitive funding category. The management cost funding category is for an applicant's management cost sub-application. So you'll only have one sub-application in the management cost funding category. For the flood mitigation assistance program, again, you'll have ranked management cost and technical assistance. So your menu looks slightly different than the screenshot here. And those categories are identified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Depending on how many sub-applications you choose to attach to an application, you can change the funding category assigned to a sub-application if you have exceeded your state set-aside and wish to include it in the competitive pool. Tribes can also use the management cost funding category for their management cost sub-application. So I will select the appropriate funding category from the drop-down menu and then click Yes, Add the Sub-Application button. After you select the funding category, the Subapplications screen appears and shows the sub-application I just attached. If I wanted to change the funding category or remove the sub-application from the application, all I need to do is open the Action menu and make my choice. So if you needed to edit the sub-application after it was attached to the grant application or send it back for revision to the sub-applicant, then you would need to remove it from the grant application before you could accomplish that. You need to rank sub-applications according to the hazard mitigation priorities identified in your state, tribal, or territorial hazard mitigation plan, and according to the programmatic guidelines for either BRIC or FMA. FEMA will take a sub-application's rank into consideration during its review process. Different grant programs have different ranking schemes, and you'll assign the sub-applications a unique sequential rank. One is the highest priority, and so on. The grant application's budget section is automatically populated by FEMA GO based on the information in the attached sub-applications. Once the sub-application budgets are rolled up, you'll notice that they all appear in the other category. So all of the dollar amounts from your sub-applications appear here in the other category. The remaining categories or budget object classes are the direct grant costs. So the costs that are associated with the state or the grant applicant directly. Applicants must manually enter the non-federal sources of funding for the application. Then the FEMA GO system adds up all the total federal and non-federal funding commitments. FEMA GO also checks to make sure that the non-federal commitments and management cost amounts are within programmatic requirements. The maximum amount that may be provided to the applicant for management costs is up to 10% of the total of all sub-applications. The applicant is not required to apply for management costs. If the amount of management costs included in the application exceeds 10% of the total sub-application budget, a warning will be displayed. You'll need to adjust your management costs to fit within this acceptable range. And you can see that the FEMA GO system tells you what the maximum allowable management cost is in the system. It may be easier if applicants finalize all non-management cost sub-applications first, and then create and attach the management cost sub-application as the final step, and that will be displayed on the budget screen. Let's take a minute to review what we've covered. By now, you should be able to explain how to attach a sub-application to an application, recognize the different classification options for funding, identify the reasons for ranking sub-application, explain the methods used to rank building resilient infrastructure and communities sub-applications or FMA sub-applications, and recognize the organization of the budget section of an application. Here are some resources that will be helpful for you if you want a refresher on what we covered today. There's a FEMA GO user manual for both applicants and sub-applicants. There's a FEMA GO help desk, which is femago@fema.dhs.gov. They also have a toll-free number. And if you want more information about the BRIC program or using FEMA GO, you can always navigate to those by clicking to fema.gov/BRIC. So thank you all for participating in Module 5 of the FEMA GO applicant training courses. Please be sure to attend our next module, Module 6, Completing and Submitting a Grant Application. Thank you.